The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hello and welcome to another edition of Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. My name is Joe Castello. Super happy to be back hosting another episode. And joining me once again, he is the Director of Technical Sales for Total Seal, Mr. Keith Jones. Keith, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to be, we'll say, alive and well and enjoying the sunny weather here in Phoenix. As Joe always says, we don't want to date the shows, but just came back from being in the Midwest, and boy, was it raining, and we'll just say glad to see the sun shining.
All right, we can date this particular show. For those of you listening 2 years into the future, it was great seeing Keith at the 2021 edition of the NHRA U.S. Nationals. Keith came out there, and we did a pit-side tech talk right next to Matt's Pro Stocker. Keith, Lake, Ed Keebler from Rottler. It was great. I was the host. We had what I deemed to be a packed house. It was very successful. There will be more coming up in the future. Dallas and Vegas. It's going to be happening if you're going to be going to one of those races in 2021. That is great. Keith, I know you had a great time.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was a new thing for us to try, and as Joe said, I think it went off very, very well. It was standing room only, and we'll just say expect the crowds to just get nothing but bigger.
Well, exactly. Learning about ring seal, it's a hot topic these days, especially on Hidden Horsepower. Today's episode, I'm very excited. Hutter Racing Engines, HutterPerformance.com, Ron Hutter. This is someone you do business with on a regular basis, Keith, and he has been a factor in multiple motorsports and in particular in the driving career of somebody that we know pretty well.
Yeah, we do. I've been dealing with Ron and his lovely wife, Thalia, for many, many years, and really enjoy talking with Ron and working with Ron and coming up with different ideas for different kinds of platforms. I mean, so many guys get into doing one kind of thing, one kind of engine program, one kind of motorsports, and Ron is a guy that's just, he's your guy. You want boat motors, road race motors, drag motors, pulling truck engines, nitrous motors. I mean, he's got his pulse on everything. And one day, we were having a conversation, and Ron at the time was really doing a lot of big cubic inch pro stock stuff, and would say, if I recall the conversation at the moment, not real happy with, we'll say, the guy that was working on their team, behind the wheel, and needed to find somebody, and that's when an introduction between himself and Matt, I kind of helped put those two guys together, and the rest of that's kind of history.
How about that? Let's not go any further before bringing him into the show. Another edition of Hidden Horsepower, Mr. Ron Hutter. Ron, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Let's get your version of that story. Hartford, your car, racing, go for it.
Well, Billy Dingman was the team owner, and I hadn't done any big inch stuff when he came, but I had done some stuff for Billy in the past when he was running NASCAR, Winston Cup. And so Keith Wilson mentioned my name to Billy, and he said, I've done business with him. We need to give him a call. So that's what started the whole ball rolling, and I ended up having a bit of a driver problem, and we were scouting around for a competent driver, and we ended up locking horns with Matt Hartford, and they won the championship that year.
Keith, how about that?
Yeah, it's excellent. I mean, it's you get a driver, you're able to. It felt good to be able to put two people together and have it all kind of come together, and like you said, win a championship. And they had some adversities that year. For those of you not familiar, if you do a little Googling on YouTube, you'll see Matt put that thing up on a roof. But they still came back, thrashed that thing, and won a championship with it. And working with Ron at that time on the big cube motors, kind of a whole different thing. And really the first time I'd worked with somebody on the big cube stuff, really trying to chisel out every last little piece. I remember Ron, playing with something, from a ring point of view, playing with crosshatch angles and looking at blow-by numbers and oil control. Ron really digs into this stuff, and it's like a dog with a scent. I mean, he gets on that scent, he's gonna know all there is to know about it, and all the research and the shared knowledge that he shared with me. about how things responded and how things reacted, and that's all stuff that he gets to apply to his craft every day.
The interaction with Keith and stuff has always been good because it's a give and take deal. He offers some suggestions and stuff that he's seen work and et cetera, and I try to give him feedback on what's going on my end and stuff. So he's keep him in the loop as far as I'm finding anything that's noteworthy.
Very interesting. Funny thing about that story, obviously, Hartford, who is still going in the NHRA and Camping World Series Pro Stock, but you mentioned Keith Wilson from Wilson Manifolds, who is like my neighbor, and we raced together at Moroso Motorsports Park for many years, right? And it's just cool to hear you talk about the two of them on a project. And, I don't know Ron, but now we're connected in multiple ways.
Yeah, it's kind of a small world, the racing community.
So let's talk about how
people who are serious about it.
People who are serious about it. So how did you get serious about it, Ron? Like, what's the beginning, the origin story for you? Cars, engines, machining, engine building.
Oh gosh, way back when, before I even had a driver's license, I built a go-kart, angle iron and plywood, and an old Briggs & Stratton motor and stuff. I guess I've been a motorhead all along. Started racing a 60 Pontiac back in the mid-'60s in junior stock. That was my first race car. And I've just loved racing all along. If it's competitive and it's racing, I'm into it.
What I know you've done, you've been involved in NASCAR, Grand National racing. We already talked a little drag racing. I know you dabble in whatever interests you at the moment, but what was your first professional racing engine job?
Drag racing, a pro stock type thing back in the early '70s. A modified production. We held the modified production record several different times. H-gas record. Raced pro stock from the second year of pro stock was in existence. As we raced from then until I quit racing. I quit driving in '76 and decided I needed to pay attention to the business because I wasn't really doing a super good job of racing or being in business, either one. So I had to concentrate on one or the other, and I chose to pay attention to the business.
Well, these are and it's great because these are things that as long as I've I've known Ron, these are little things that I didn't know, and especially started off with a Pontiac, and I'm a Pontiac guy, so that we got Pontiac blood flowing. So prior to your own shop, Ron, did you start off working for somebody else, or how'd you, we'll say in your formative years, how did you kind of master the craft? I mean, just futzing around with stuff, or did you work for somebody else prior?
No, I never worked for anybody else. The only jobs I ever held were in car dealerships. I worked on the line as a mechanic for a while, and I went to college for 3 years. Before that, bored me to death, and I dropped out. But I worked on the line, and then worked up to night service manager, and et cetera. And then I started my own shop here in Chardon, and it was called Hutt's Dyno Shop. It had a chassis dyno in it and stuff, but I had to close that up because I had to go to active duty. And when I got back out, I went back to work for the guy that I sold the dyno to, and for a couple of years, and then in 1970, I ended up moving in here and starting. Back then, it was known as Quick Stuff Engineering, and then I guess it was '77. I changed the name to Hutter Racing Engines, and been poking around here for 50-some years ever since.
Huh.
Oh, that's awesome. See, these are all things I didn't know, and thank you for your service, by the way.
Yes. What branch?
Army.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that.
So, at what point in time, Ron? I mean, like you say, you were drag racing. You got heavy into the circles track stuff, the Grand National. How did that evolve from the drag race stuff into that world?
Well, I became acquainted with Jerry Stahl, and Jerry said that I should pay attention to circle track stuff, that the people were more likely to spend money and serious about their racing and stuff. So I ventured into that realm and had the good fortune to get tied up with Ritchie Evans, again with the help of Jerry Stahl. And Ritchie was, he ran exceedingly well, won multiple championships, and that started the modified thing. We started at NASCAR Modified Series, and at one time we were doing 14 cars there.
Wow,
and
that's a lot. That's a lot of engines.
Well, the modifieds they're not as hard on motors as, they don't worry about having a fresh motor every race and stuff like the Cup cars and the Grand National cars and stuff. They don't worry about a fresh motor every race. They go pretty much. Our rebuild times were in the vicinity of 15 to 2,000 laps.
Oh wow! So longevity,
they could plan on. Yeah, they could plan on having service that long. So we didn't see them back very often.
But they want power. I know that. How did you, how were you in developing power early on? Coming from the line, working as a mechanic. We've spoken with other guests on Hidden Horsepower, and it seems like that background is really good for getting it right the first time. Right, Keith? We've heard that in the past. Like, you want to get it right the first time, and when you're in that world, you got to develop power. You got to make power for customers. Trying stuff, figuring out things, being ahead of the curve in terms of development. Did you consider yourself ahead of the curve, like an innovative person?
I guess I think part of the big advantage we had back when was we did our own cylinder heads in house, and we could go right from the flow bench and et cetera to the engine on the dyno and prove out that the head really make more power and torque. Was it better, or was it just flow bench numbers? The first time I realized that the flow bench wasn't the whole answer, we were rebuilding a motor for Darrell Waltrip, and I was poking around the flow bench and poking around, and I picked up some flow in the intake port. I thought, oh, well, this motor's already good, and this thing's really going to be killer now. We put it on the dyno, and I was off, I think 14. And we poked around looking, were the rings seated? Was this wrong or was that wrong? And just came down to the cylinder heads were the only thing really different, not a question mark. So I took the heads off the motor and filled up, puttied back in the area where I'd removed material, and 13 of it came back.
Wow.
So that, I think that was for us anyway, it was an advantage because we had, the loop was within the house, and I think that worked well for us and early on, and then in the mid-90s, I got tied up with Carl Foltz at CFE, and he's excellent cylinder head guy. He's really on top of the game there.
Yeah, to say the least.
And continues to be there. It's amazing. Like you said, Ron, you get out in front of the pack, and the guys, what it takes to. I hate to say this, it's never to get there, but once you get there, how do you stay there? That's always, that's a, big part of the challenge. Once you get on the top of the hill, how do you stay on top of the hill?
Well, you don't give up looking for more. No matter how good you are, there's always something more there if you're willing to look for it and put forth the effort.
See that, and I just got to throw. See that, and every form of racing wants that, but that's the pro stock guy in it right there. There's always a little more. There's always another half, another one. So that's because Ron and I have many, many conversations about board finishes and board geometry and coatings, and and there's stuff that I've worked with Ron on that literally I'd never done before. Hey, we're bouncing ideas like we talked about before. What about this? What if we tried, coating the second ring? What about put, this coating on the top ring and playing with all these different things and sizes and profiles? And Ron's kind of always been, one of those, hey, I'll try it kind of guys. You get some people that want to, they're willing to try things, and and then you got the guys that are, I don't know. Ron, we'll talk it out, and he's always willing to give that a shot, see what it does, and that shared information. What did and from the ring point of view, kind of steering this towards the rings a little bit, what's the biggest changes you've seen over the years, Ron, and the biggest advantages you think that we've been able to help you with?
Oh, the ring package itself has gotten, well, it's been refined. A narrower, thinner ring, with less weight. That the finish, the profile is precise, and the ring groove to go along with the ring, so the ring can do its job as designed. If you have you have a good ring but you don't have a good groove, you're doing that ring some dirt, because you're not allowing it to really come up to its potential. That ring thing is, the finishes and the tolerances and coatings, the profiling and et cetera, it all adds up.
I'm glad you touched on the ring groove there for a second, because this is something that a lot of listeners may not realize, and this is something that I know Ron's run into a zillion times, I run into all the time, is, rings and pistons have to go together. It's literally a hand and a glove. It's a lifter on a cam, it's a brake pad on a rotor. These things become mated surfaces. And a challenge that we face all the time is people will go to rebuild that engine and replace that ring and want to use that piston over. And I'm not saying that you can't do this, but I have a lot of guys that struggle. They can't get it back. They go through it. They did everything right. They honed it. They did all the stuff, but it just doesn't come back to where it was. And 99% of the time, as good as that piston looks, that ring groove's not as fresh and as rectangular. It's just not what it was day one. And that ring, as we've said so many times, a ring can't fix a bad cylinder. It can't fix a bad ring groove. So for those of you listening to this, if you run yourself into that, or you find yourself in that situation, you want to check the ring groove. You want to get some gauge pins out and start checking that ring groove. If that job card says, that groove's 043.5, and you stick a 43.5 gauge pin in there, that pin should be snug all the way around that groove. If it's got a little slop in it, you got a groove that looks like a teeter-totter, and there's your power.
Those parts get mated. They get happy with each other, and when you start disturbing that interface, then the bad things can happen. I know that, it was real popular. I don't know, maybe it still is real popular as far as anodizing ring grooves. I've never had any luck with having a ring groove that's coated or anodized or anything like that, it's performing like a precision machined ring groove with nothing done to it other than just the precision machining.
Agreed, Ron. It is something that's still being done out there, in the guise of preventing micro welding. But as you said, the piston company spends all this time, making this precision groove. We make the precision ring, and then you go throwing this anodizing into it, which is anything but precision, at least from my perspective, and you get the result that you just said. It's an absolute, it's just never as good as the other way around. That's for certain.
Right. Yeah. Right. I know that certain racetracks, maybe not anymore since they cut the horsepower way back on those cars and stuff, but you go to big tracks like Michigan and Atlanta and stuff where you're a long time on a throttle at a high horsepower, high RPM situation. If you don't, it seems like if you break it in properly on the dyno and stuff and take your time and get everything running good on the dyno, the chances of micro welding are much less than if you just give it a quick lick and a prayer as far as the break-in goes.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, and that's something that, again, we deal with a lot, is the guys that are running the dynos and running these things. And, again, Ron knows it, I've seen it many times, is, the people will put, 3, 10-second pulls on an engine, and yep, she's good. And you're a long way from home at that point in time.
Oh, yeah, you betcha. Yeah, you got to kind of sneak up on it. You don't dare go in there and start leaning on it wide open right away and expect everything to become properly mated and broken in and happy with each other.
That's something that we talked about in the Tech Talk, Keith. That comes up a lot. And as I eavesdrop on other people's conversations, the break-in procedure, I think that. I don't want to say that's where a lot of people are making a lot of mistakes, but it seems that might be the case, that this is an area that that a lot of people maybe cause themselves problems by not doing it the right way, Keith.
I agree completely. So many of the problems that I see, from a ring point of view, piston point of view, they are 100% purely self-inflicted. The break-in process and how the length of time and procedure and how fragile, and again, that's probably not the right word to use, but maybe it is, how fragile that relationship is at that point in time. And if you tip it, a little too far one way or the other way, you're going to spoil it real quick. And if you get everything just right, you're going to come out with something really good.
Another thing that can happen inadvertently, and people don't realize it, but if you fuel wash that cylinder right off the bat, that ring seat will never be right.
Yeah, it's never going to get a chance.
Walls and stuff. It's never going to come in like it could if it was not fuel washed and just had the proper amount of oil and stuff there.
And then you get one shot at breaking it in, and you're never going to get it to be what it could have been. I guess it'll still run, right? But it's just not going to run as.
Oh yeah, it'll still run, but it'll just be off on power. It won't ever come up to its true potential because it's glazed the ring or the walls.
Now, Ron, we already talked about Hartford and you guys running together, so that's one side of your working resume. You dropped the name Darrell Waltrip going back, and so a lot of our listeners are engine builders and racers, but a lot of them are just fans to hear interesting stories of the people behind the scenes in this industry, because after all, the people who make the power are the people who win the championships. Who else have you worked with and around in your career that would be interesting to those folks?
Well, we did Junior Earnhardt's motors the 2 years he won the championship on the
there's one
series.
That's a good one. Good.
Yeah, they may not have heard of that guy,
Yeah, he's gone on to some pretty good things. Hey, right here in the studio, I've got a little Dale Earnhardt AC Delco championship car. That's so cool that your engines were in that car, and so many people fell in love with that kid because of those 2 years.
Yeah, it was a good deal. He won that championship 2 years in a row, and I didn't. Trevor went to the banquet the first year, and Tony Uri Sr. says, "You're coming to the banquet." I said, "Well, if you win it next year too, and then I'll go to the banquet," because I'm not big on banquets and winner circles and stuff like that. I'm kind of a stand back and watch type guy. But darn it, they didn't go and win it the second year, and I had to go to Hollywood to that banquet and stand up there in front of people and say a few words.
How does that deal?
Call my bluff.
How does that deal come together? Like, do you get a call and is it Tony Uri Sr.? Is it Earnhardt? Who made that happen?
Tony Uri Sr. is the one that called me, and they were struggling with our engine builder they had, and they were looking for something different, and we had stuff that in that series that was running quite well, and Tony wanted to check out and see if he could come up with something, an agreeable deal with us to supply motors for him, and we did for those 2 years.
Very cool. So I don't know if you're going to be able to trump, Earnhardt Jr. as a name drop, but what about going back a little bit further?
Oh, Ritchie Evans. Jimmy Spencer.
Okay. Mr. Excitement.
Mike McLaughlin. They were modified guys that went on to the Busch Grand National type thing. Dirt modifieds, Bob McCready, and several of the cars that ran that dirt modified series were, we had motors in those cars back then. But when we started doing a lot of the Busch Grand National stuff, we kind of closed the shop for a few years and just did the lease program for motors for down south. In 2003 or 4, we decided that NASCAR wasn't liking the idea of privateers around. They wanted to kind of have everything under control right there in Mooresville and Charlotte area. So I quit doing the NASCAR thing and just kind of went back and did a little of this and a little of that, and whatever suited my fancy. I decided did some road race stuff and BMWs, and did a Aston Martin DB6 for a guy. Just kind of sprinkled around stuff around here and there and did different stuff.
Like you and I have talked about, right? Like stuff to keep, you're doing the stuff that interests you now, not just, let's say not just what it takes to keep the lights on. Not saying it was, but you got to pay the bills. But now you're kind of, picking and choosing. And I think that's kind of, to me, that's kind of fun. You get to work on the ones you want to work on and do the things that you want to do.
That's right.
I know you've been playing with some nitrous stuff. Is that kind of, got you going right now?
Yeah, we did it's a spin-off of our turbocharged motor that we have in our family race car.
Mm-hmm.
It's an LS architecture aluminum engine that it's classified as a small block, even though it's 440 inches. But we did one for the Polkarskis that was running that Pro 632 Pro and PDRA, and it was 480 inches. And they went in and set the record and won a couple races and stuff. And then all of a sudden they started adding weight to them, added weight to them. And so they kind of stepped on them a little bit. So, but at any rate, that was a nitrous deal. But Polkarskis have a close relationship as far as the nitrous part of it goes. The actual nitrous tune-up with Brandon Swetzer. He helped them with the actual nitrous tune-up, and we do the basic engine itself.
Well, like any class of racing, you find that you find that loophole, that advantage, building a quote unquote small block, and like you say, they're gonna try to take that advantage away as fast as they can.
Yeah,
I think we've seen that in about every form of racing. As soon as you step up, they're going to figure out a way to slow you down.
It's kind of unfortunate, especially in the circle track realm, because it's turned a lot of the racing into just follow the leader stuff. It's a little bit unfortunate in that respect. It kind of takes some of the interest away and the excitement for fans and stuff if they're just out there riding around following each other.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I grew up in that era, that age. Call it the golden age of creativity, and the whole goal was to do something different and to be different. We'll say go back to the 70s for music in the 60s, and you want to get a record deal, you don't ever sound like somebody else. You got to be you. And now it's like you got to sound like everybody else. And racing, to me, that's the whole point, is to be different, to come up with that the next greatest idea. And I know you're always working on that. I know you're always trying to push it.
Yeah, some of the best racing I ever seen was the modifieds running up in New England. You get Ritchie and Ronnie Bouchard and Charlie Drzomback and those guys, and they started like back 12th, 13th, 14th, and through there, and had to come to the lead. And that was pretty serious, because not only they were racing with the cars in front of them, they were racing with each other too, and it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that Northeast Modified Series, that was serious. That was some serious racing.
Back then it was.
We've run into the conversation several times here on Hidden Horsepower, and of course we ask everybody out there to subscribe and write a review, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or otherwise. But try to control costs through making rules to limit development discussion. And you make all these rules, and then everybody has to adhere to the rule, and it ends up costing money, and it's counterproductive.
Well, the big thing is, no matter how good the intentions are of the people who make the rules, they don't tend to be close enough to the deal to know exactly what costs what. But if, just say they pass a set of rules and put them in place, and people got to spend money to conform to those rules, if they left the rules in place for 5 years or something, that might actually save somebody a little bit of money. But that doesn't happen. They pass these rules, and then maybe a year, 2 years later at the most, they're changing them again because they're not happy with what they did. So it's costing people money all over again. That if they're gonna do a rule deal, they need to put it in place and leave it there, and that may in fact save people a little bit of money. But the way they do it, it just ends up costing people money.
I agree with what Ron just said. If you're going to pass the rules, you've got to let the rules stand. Previous interview, with Kenny McNamara, kind of the same thing. You keep bouncing around the rules all the time, and nothing ever gets a chance to settle down and amortize itself out. And it's just, we'll call it initial investment all the time, because they keep having to react to the changes, regardless of what part of the car it is. You got to let that settle down and let the cost spread out. So what's the latest project, Ron? I remember the BMW stuff, working with the Alusil bores. It's funny. Ron was doing BMW 24-hour stuff, and there's a product called Alusil. It's a silicon-impregnated aluminum bore, and there's a certain process of how that has to be treated, and we were having ring problems. And, Ron realized it because they were in a dry sump engine pulling vacuum. They had to change the way that was perceived of how to process that cylinder and leave a little more crosshatch in it, back to that oil retention. And again, one of those things that Ron has helped us to learn and to understand about these exotic cylinder materials. And have you been working with any of that kind of stuff still, Ron? I'm not sure where you're at with those programs.
No, I decided not to do any more BMW stuff. When we started doing that program, they were getting like 23 hours out of the motors, and by the time we ended it up, it was over 70.
Wow. So yeah,
so it's a pretty substantial increase in useful life.
Oh yeah, triple. That you talk about saving money on a budget.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That you weren't building no Pinto engines there. That couldn't have been a cheap piece.
No, it was a real learning process in that deal, because that aluminum stuff is it's really tricky.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that sports car stuff, sports car technology. It's I guess common thought that the drag race stuff is maybe a little primitive, but is it, like, compared to what you were working with?
Well, when you say primitive, you're comparing typically pushrod engines with overhead cam, variable valve timing stuff, and fuel injection, electronic fuel injection, electronic engine management stuff, and a lot of that hasn't flexed into the draggiest stuff yet. But I suppose that eventually it will. But some of those European manufacturers, and Ford has too. They've those 5-liter and 5.5, 5.4 motors they have with a dual every cams. They make some serious power.
Yeah. So as we come down the stretch here, Ron, I'm really interested in hearing a couple of more things. I will ask you momentarily to give some advice to the next generation out there, because hopefully there are new young kids that are still interested in engine building and machining and working late in the shop to find that extra hidden horsepower out there. But first, I'd love to know about Keith. Has he ever come to you with an idea that was just crazy? I know that they're on the development train too over there at Total Seal, and they like to come up with ideas and sometimes come up with something that is out of the norm for an engine builder, but they try it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, et cetera, and so on. So what about that?
I've never been bashful about trying stuff. I wish I could say everything I tried worked, but that's just not the case. You try something, but you have to be objective about it. Like that little story I told you about Darrell Waltrip. It broke my heart that I spent all that time doing those heads and stuff, and they weren't as good. If I could look for an excuse to blame something else, but the fact of the matter was, I messed up and made the heads worse rather than better. You got to be objective. You got to pay attention to detail. The details are, everybody knows how to bore a block. Everybody knows how to do a basic hone job and all that kind of stuff. But when you start picking stuff apart, the details are what makes a difference.
The details are what makes the difference. So true. Keith, final question for Ron Hutter from Hutter Racing Engines, and folks can check out the website, hutterperformance.com. Final question, Keith.
So with everything going on, what's the newest project, Ron? I know you guys got the house race car, your son Trevor, all the stuff you guys are working on. What's the next thing? What challenge do you and I have to face next?
Well, I guess I'd like to try and come up with some kind of a refined deal for my turbocharged deal. Kind of push the envelope there a little bit and see what we can come up with. The combination, the ring life in it and the wall life and stuff like that is all, quite good for one of those motors. But, again, when we take it apart and look at it, I think that there's room for improvement, and I'd like to try and move down that avenue a little bit and try and make that combination a little better.
Well, I think we can. We can look at, like we talked about a couple times, the conform rings. Try to push it to the next thing. One of the interesting things, and it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment with Ron, is things that we talked about. Pushing that envelope, and Ron, as Ron said in his own words, he's not bashful about trying stuff. But the great thing, and Ron recognizes this, and this is what he will try something, but it's like, hey, that worked really good, but we gave up a little, we made some power, we gave up a little bit of longevity. So what if we backed it off like halfway and working and refining, what is going to give us the power, but also the longevity? Because, it's great to make power, but if it's only good for one pass, what's the point? Or, one trip around the circle track, what's the point? It's got to last. And, again, Ron was talking about the lifespan, in the early days of the modified engines, and NASCAR's come full circle to that now. You look at the amount of lifespan that's required, and you see more and more of that, where we have to find, we got to find the power. Nobody ever wants to give that up, but we also have to make it last. So that's that's a big part of what we work on together.
Yeah, it all goes hand in hand. It's hard to justify one without the other.
Power and longevity. Speaking of longevity, you have certainly had it in this field, and we hope that we're doing a podcast. People are out there running machines, listening right now, maybe even some kids in a class somewhere listening to the greatest engine builders of all time give their secrets. Would you have any advice for that next generation, how to make the most of this profession, of this career, to get ahead in their lives?
Well, one thing for sure, it's a whole lot easier to deal with good racers. I've had the good fortune to deal with good racers. And some of the names I've mentioned, you can tell that I've had the good fortune to deal with good people. I've also been fortunate enough to have a relationship with Jerry Stahl and Bill Jenkins and et cetera. That all helps, but you have to be objective, and you have to pay attention to detail. You can't just throw stuff together and think you're gonna get it done, at a high level.
Attention to detail, and yes, the Grump even gets a shout out here on Hidden Horsepower. Absolutely love it. Ron, thank you very much for joining us here on the podcast. Appreciate what you do. So much history, cross platforms in motorsports, and the fact that you're still going at it and trying to find horsepower. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Keith, obviously, any final thoughts for Ron? Now's the time.
Just to reach out and say thank you to you and your family, and again, the respect that we give each other. It's a great working relationship. Always has been, and beyond that, it's a privilege to call you my friend.
Yep, me too. I feel the same way, and it's been a pleasure talking to you folks.
And there he goes, Ron Hutter from Hutter Racing Engines. Keith, the history, the experience, casually dropping out. Yeah, well, Darrell Waltrip made a mistake, or Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s, championship runs in the Busch Series. Amazing.
Yeah, Ron's a fantastic guy and a very modest soul. He's not one to wave his flag and beat the drum. And I'm sure, like, the people that he talked about, that's probably just literally the tip of the iceberg. He's been involved, with so many different professional level race teams, and you mentioned his name, in in the circles that know him. It's like, oh yeah, Ron. He is truly a great guy and a gentleman.
Yes. And the advice to the next generation, attention to detail. I know that's kind of like a cornerstone of Hidden Horsepower. I like to extract something from these amazing engine builders, and that's one that's good for everything, right? Attention to detail. You don't have to be an engine builder to take advantage of that advice.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's slow down, take a look at it. Again, attention to detail. Pay attention to all the little things going around, because if your eyes are open and your ears are listening, that engine and this world and this life will teach you some things if you're just paying attention.
Absolutely. Well, this puts another one in the books. Hidden Horsepower, presented by Total Seal. Keith, great hanging out with you once again, both at the track and on the podcast. We hope to see you down the road. I know we've got Trackside Tech Talks planned for Dallas. We've got one planned for Vegas. We're going to be out there as the NHRA countdown goes on. And, of course, into the future, for those that are listening into the future, we ask you to subscribe and write a review about the podcast and check out our past episodes. We've got some really great people in there who share so much great information. But what about you, Keith? What's going on at Total Seal? And if somebody's got a project, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, just you can email us through the website. My email, KeithJ@TotalSeal, info@TotalSeal. Again, through the website, TotalSeal.com. Give us a call at the toll-free 800-874-2753. We're probably one of the easiest companies to get a hold of, and we will actually answer you back. So yeah, we're pretty rich. Just reach out to us. Glad to help you.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to break. We timestamp this all over, and it's okay, right? But when Greg Anderson was standing there watching your presentation at the U.S. Nationals, and here the guy is about to be the winningest pro stock racer in history, which he now is. At the time he wasn't, but now he is. And he is there, and he probably, you might assume he'd come over to be polite to Matt, but he stayed there for the whole time and watched the whole presentation. What were you thinking?
It was an honor and a privilege. About a third, maybe half of the way through that we were doing our presentation, you keep looking up. You're looking at the crowd. You're talking to the different people, and Greg's still there. He's still looking. He's not chatting it up with Matt. And it was like, okay, he's here for the deal. We'll just say it was a true honor, and felt great having him there, and love the opportunity to sit down with him and talk more with him about piston rings. And he said that he would do our show, so we're going to get him on here, and we're going to hammer him on that.
That's right. That's right. Subscribe on an upcoming episode with Greg Anderson, who maybe at that time will be the winningest pro stock driver ever in history. We will just have to wait and see. He's Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales for Total Seal Piston Rings. My name is Joe Castello. Keith, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody that's listening.
And we'll see you guys on the next episode of Hidden Horsepower, presented by Total Seal.